So I will just do brief introductions of the JSP team. So if you could just send a wave when I call your name. So I'm Sherelle Green. If you haven't known, I have sent you thousands of emails and have bugged you to come here. So I'm happy you made it. If there's any questions about anything related to PET or the SJC exchange, anything like that, please don't hesitate to reach out. So I'll pass to Christina to just send a wave.
Oh, me, sorry. Hi, folks. Christina Sansoni, JSP. You've also received a bunch of emails from me. Thank you for your responses. And I will serve as tech support today. So if you have any issues, feel free to send me a DM and we'll get you all situated. I'm going to kick it to Amy.
Hey, everyone. I'm Amy December. I guess I should wave too. Yeah, just part of the JSP team and excited to facilitate some of the breakout rooms today. And I will kick it over to Jen.
Ditto, my name is Jen Lurch and exactly everything that Amy said. And I'm going to kick it over to Michael.
Hi, everyone. Michael Mengafi. Nice to meet and see all of you. And I'll also be one of the breakout room facilitators today. Oh, and I'll kick it over to Shannon.
Hey, all. I'm Shannon. In addition to being Team Taco, I will be joining a lot of you today in breakout rooms and leading a lot of our discussion today. So really excited. I know Holly also has a cat that sometimes makes an appearance on videos. So we'll all probably get to know my cat as well throughout the day. So excuse me on that.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. So I will start to share my screen. We can walk through the agenda and what to expect from today. Okay, so as you've known, the title of this first workshop is called Pulling Back the Curtain on Failure to Appear and Reimagining How We Account for Court Appearance. Skip through housekeeping. So through today's agenda, we're going to first identify our collective level of discomfort and comfort. I'll clarify that a little bit later as I talk about the survey results that we conducted last week. Discuss how each of us comes to this table. So we do have a diverse array of participants, and we do want to account for the diverse array of perspectives and opinions on how to ensure equity for folks coming through the front center of the criminal legal system. And then unpacking real stories. So throughout today, we'll be focusing on narratives of folks who have experienced a failure to appear and really start to contextualize those experiences and what we can do to make things better for folks, and also unpack how people make their way into these situations and make decisions on how to return to court. And then lastly, in our breakout sessions and also our debriefing sessions, we're going to critically consider failure to appear and what that means and how we move forward. That being said, I want to turn to Brian Taylor for his discussion on the SJC exchange.
Awesome. Thanks, Cheryl. And I think hopefully I can share my screen. I'll want to pull up SJC Exchange here in just a minute. Actually, let me see if I can just do it now. There we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Taylor. I'm from the Pretrial Justice Institute, and I'm one of the community managers for SJC Exchange. I also have my colleague, Dan Chu, on the call with us. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about SJC Exchange. Hopefully all of you are members at this point. If not, I'll just go through really quickly how you can become a member. And I wanted to show you around a little bit of what you can get out of the exchange and specifically the PET sub-community that's in there as well. So right now I'm on the homepage. I'm not logged in, and there are some resources that are available to people when you're not logged in. So you can see upcoming events, the general library, blogs, some things that are just available to you before logging in. I'm going to go up here to the top right-hand corner and click on log in. And if you don't have an account yet, you can just click on this new user, register now. You'll create an account, and then within about 24 hours, we'll just approve your membership in the community, and you'll get an email letting you know that you can log in and do everything within the community that you'd like to. So I'm going to log in here. And you'll notice on the homepage, there are a few things like directly to the library or the events. There's some quick links over here. And then the main section right here is just all about the latest discussions. And this will pull the main community. So there's the main SJC community, and then any other communities that you might be part of. So I scroll down here, I'm part of the pet network down here. And so I see that it's listed down here. I can go directly to that, that sub community right there by clicking there, or I can come up here and navigate with the menu bar up here. So communities, I can go to my communities. Before I go there, I just wanted to show that like now that I'm logged in addition to like upcoming events, you can also get information about previous network meetings there. There are more resources here. So you can have like the Speakers Bureau, and there's the Crime Narrative Resource Library. You can still have access to blogs. And then there's also the directory here where you can search by site or name, organization, a few different ways of searching for people. So if you need to get in contact with someone and you don't have their contact information, this might be a good place to start. So I'm going to go over here to my communities really quickly, just so that I can show you the pet community here. So I'm going to scroll down. You likely won't have as many sub-communities as I do, but you should be able to see this SJC Pretrial Equity and Transformation Network community. Once you come in here, this is the space just for this group. So you'll see here that there are 66 members so far. I think that that's about 2/3 of the people that should be in there right now, if I'm not mistaken. So we still need to get a few more people in here. So please check with your colleagues that they are part of this community, because there will definitely be important information in here for your guys's networks. You'll see here that Sherelle started a post just yesterday to introduce she introduced herself, and then if you can go in here and introduce yourself as well. So if you just go in here to her discussion post, again, this is just within this community here. And what you can do is you can just go ahead and click on this reply right here. Oh, I need to just save how I get notifications within this community. But if I go back here and I click on reply, now it will show up down here, and I can just reply just like a normal like email or anything like that. I do encourage you to go in there, introduce yourself so that you can get to know, so others can get to know you and you can get to know others within the pet network. That's about it for just like a really quick rundown of SJC Exchange and the sub community. If you do have any questions, you can reach out to me or Dan. There's also information here on like the about page that there's a contact information here. When you're logged in, it automatically puts your information in there. So please reach out if you do have any questions. If you have anyone that's having trouble getting in or anything like that, please let us know. But we do hope that you're able to join and get all of the value from the different discussions and information that's getting pushed out. Invite you to share anything or ask any questions within the SJC Exchange. Like that's what it's for people to ask questions and get support from each other.
Brian, can I just ask a quick question? Will folks have to go in and individually adjust how they receive their notifications, or like what's the default for people?
Oh yeah, good question. Yeah, so when you log in, the main SJC Exchange community, you're going to be set up for a daily digest. So everything that happens today, you're going to get an email tomorrow morning with like a rundown of everything that happens. So if I look here, like it looks like a few things happened today. And so like maybe these 3 will show up, and if there's anything else that happened today, those will show up in your daily digest tomorrow. You can always update how you get the notifications. So for example, like the pet network, if I go up here and click on this settings, I can change from real time to daily digest to no emails at all. So that's how I would change how I would get email notifications. I won't go into it right now, but like also up here in your profile, I do encourage you to like at least put your picture in there. You can also put some other information in here about your bio and things like that. But there's also like, oh, not your inbox, but under my account, you can go down here to community notification and email preferences and change some things around in there in terms of like, there's like consolidated digest. So if you're a member of multiple communities, you can like get all of those in one email instead of multiple emails from the different communities that you're part of. So hopefully that's helpful. Any other questions? Cool.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll stop sharing here.
I will share my screen, jump right back into the PowerPoint. Okay, perfect. All right, so the name of the expansion network is called Pretrial Equity and Transformation. And with that, we wanted this to be a collective space where we can learn from each other and grow together to ensure equity for all persons coming through our criminal legal system. Equity is not a program, it's not something that operates in a vacuum, but it must be woven into our daily practices, internally and externally in our jurisdictions. In order to know where we're going, we need to recognize where we're coming from, which is why we chose to take that poll last week during our kickoff. So in doing so, last week, we asked you to complete our survey to explore your knowledge and level of comfort in using various terms. So here is just the illustration of the survey responses. So 37 people responded to the survey, and larger circles here indicate that folks are more knowledgeable about specific terms. So you'll see some larger circles around criminal legal terms, right? So failure to appear, conditional release, pretrial detention, but you'll also see larger circles around some terms as it pertains to equity. So sexism, discrimination, system barriers. So that's great. We're moving in the right direction. But as we move along, we do see generally across the board that folks have more comfort levels in discussing these terms internally with their colleagues or externally in the workplace, but have less comfort discussing them or facilitating larger groups. So again, we look at terminology comfort. The larger circles are for folks who have more comfort level, who have higher levels of comfort surrounding these terms, and the smaller circles indicate folks that are less comfortable with these terms. So you'll see larger terms, larger circles around the terms failure to appear, racism, sexism, pretrial supervision, but then smaller circles, which indicates less comfort around xenophobia, structural disadvantage, legal cynicism. So we say all this to say, across these 18 months, we not only intend for you to learn about innovative front-end policies and practices of those coming through the system, but we also hope to grow your level of knowledge and comfort to understand how inequity is perpetuated in these spaces and how to have critical dialogue to unpack these processes. We know that these conversations may be difficult and sometimes uncomfortable, but we hope this network provides a safe space for everyone to engage in courageous dialogue. So I do want to hold the space if anyone has questions on the survey results specifically before we jump right in. Seeing none, I will turn it to Shannon.
Hi all, thanks so much, Sherelle. And we're excited to kind of get started and unpack some of these issues that we're seeing, to think through how we expand the work that we're doing, expand the great work that we're already doing in our home and institutions, and thinking through some of these concerns about how we increase equity in the process. To do that today, we're going to be talking about real stories. Sherelle, do you have the power to move it? Thank you so much. And as part of talking about those real stories, we're actually going to use data that we collected. Lake County, Illinois, which is a SJC implementation site, was really interested in examining why individuals do not get to court as scheduled. They do have text message reminders, they do have some other interventions that their court uses, but they were still concerned that they were missing the mark, that they maybe weren't understanding the full context of what was getting in the way for folks. And they were really, really interested in doing this work. So shout out to Lake County for leading our charge about collecting this really important and really thoughtful data. They teamed with us. And so we collected data from August 2021 through April 2022. We just finished data collection. We were able to talk with 50 people who all had, who did not get to court as scheduled. And as a result, we met them in custody. So these are real stories as told by real people who could not get to court, and they were in custody for that reason. Of the people we talked to, about 30% of them or 28% of them were Black men, 28% were white men, 10% were Hispanic men, and 2% were Asian men. You'll see that 14% were Black women, 16% were white women, and 4% were Hispanic women. Most of the folks that we talked to, 25%, were in because their underlying charge, the charge that originally brought them to court that they were going for, was for property offenses. There was also about a quarter for violent offenses and about a quarter for drug offenses. There was also a significant DUI and misdemeanor, minor misdemeanor convictions. A little note that you might have percolating in the background as you're thinking about this, we're going to assume that the property crimes were felonies. We don't know for sure. We didn't ask that information. That was wasn't really the nexus of why we're talking to folks in custody. But the reason for that is because the Illinois state felony threshold is as low as $500. So it's safe to assume that probably most of these people, for those that are that came in under a property offense, were coming in under a felony property offense. But a little asterisk there to kind of contextualize who these people are and why they were coming to court in the first place. Next slide. So with that, we're going to actually hear from them. So while we could spend all day talking about why people fail to get to court or assume things about it, there's no need. We have 50 stories that we're going to talk about. We're not going to get through all 50 of them. We'd be here for a very long time, but we're going to unpack a few of them at a time. We're going to talk about what they mean and what's getting in the way for these folks. Next slide. Specifically, we're going to move into breakout rooms. Christina has been working hard at work while we've been chatting, moving people into breakout rooms. So you'll be assigned to one of the JSP staff members. You'll be in a group of mixed people, so not necessarily with your current site and colleagues, and you'll unpack the stories together. When you're unpacking it and when you're discussing it, we want you to think about the individual circumstances that are getting in the way for these folks. Maybe the policies and rules that might be getting in the way for the folks. Are those rules statute rules? Are those rules court rules? Are those rules judge rules? Like, who made these rules? We want you to also be thinking about system barriers and really any other barriers that you see coming up for these folks. We're going to spend about 10 minutes in our breakout rooms discussing these stories. The first breakout room, we're going to talk about 4 individual stories specifically. With that, I will turn it over to Christina to help us get organized.
It looks like I have everyone assigned. So you just have to follow the little prompt to get into the room. We've got 10 minutes in the rooms, and I'll go ahead and give a 2-minute warning, which is in effect me closing the room. So when we close the room, you'll have 2 minutes to wrap up the discussion, and then we will see you back in the main room. If you, for any reason, get kicked out of Zoom, you'll end up back in the main room, and then I can just get you back into the correct breakout room. So, all right, here we go, guys.
All right, so it looks like some groups got to 4 stories. My group personally got to 2. And so thinking about kind of these real stories that you've been hearing, first and foremost, they range certainly of things that were impacting folks. It seems like those things range from health issues, maybe medical compliance. I heard some lack of transportation, a lot of fear of judges, maybe, negative court experiences, some logistics about addresses, being a primary caregiver, responsibilities to a wife, and children. I see emotional exhaustion. You guys must have gotten to the 2 newborn babies story. So thinking about this like wide array of issues that are coming up for folks, as you can kind of see on the screen here, what comes up for you guys when thinking about these barriers? Like, are these barriers that you're hearing often from individuals in your court?
Well, I'm not in a courtroom, but I
Sure.
think what struck me is that there wasn't, you couldn't say that we could help this person if only we'd given them transportation, or if we'd only given them a ride, or if we'd only had some babysitting. That these people, I think, are probably have more problems than the average person. And so they're dealing with multiple issues, so that there isn't one solution that is going to help. I mean, each one of them needed like 4 things that was going to help them get to court.
Holly, yeah, I think, wow, you might have hit our punchline on the first response, Holly. I promise she's not a seed. Guys, we did not plant her. But that's exactly right. I think that's exactly it, is that it's not simply just a transportation issue or a court reminder issue, that these are complex and co-occurring needs for sure. I know in our group, we had folks saying that some of these things were coming up for their folks. Anybody else? Were any of these barriers that were discussed new barriers that you hadn't heard before, or everything sound what you expected, or what folks in your system are navigating? Feel free to unmute yourself, or you can also use the chat function as well.
I think it's very, very similar. I literally at 2:30, right before I popped onto this call, was sitting in a virtual court, and it was a family court experience. And what was most interesting is that none of the families, so the actual individuals who have to be to court that these deciding factors are about, were even discussed, right, in terms of our time or ability to attend. So we sat there and I cleared my calendar for this 2:30 court that I had no say in the last time it was set. And I'm there serving as a supervisor for a family court visitation session. And again, this time we sat there and I kid you not, listened to the judge go day by day and ask if each day worked for the 3 attorneys that were present, while all of the families being represented on both sides sat there like, is this really happening? What if we can't attend at these various times? And we were on there for 15 minutes, and at least 10 of it was trying to coordinate a date for the attorneys and the judge. None of us asked, right? And so I know that the young lady that I am there on behalf of has to leave work because it's in the middle of the day and she is working and she doesn't get paid to leave. She can't speak up and say it because we don't even have the opportunity to say anything. And I hear and am feeling the same way, right? I'm the CEO of my organization, right? And I'm sitting there like, really right now? None of us are being asked anything? But I mean, it just happened. And that's the reality. And then I have grandma, right? Is who they're working against, texting me saying, well, what does this even mean? I'm thinking your attorney isn't even telling you what this means. Like, you don't even know. And I'm here in the middle. So it's just fascinating to experience, right? Like literally right before we got here, that there's zero communication in terms of what the individuals that have to attend, that lives are going to be influenced. No say, no opportunity to even talk.
Thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing that. I think that is a really, really powerful story, right? That lends itself to thinking about the rules of the court, right? How the culture of the court is set. You know, we know that obviously judges have a significant amount of power in court culture, and that matters. But I think that your bottom line, Cindy, is spot on, right? Is that culture is impacting people's lives. And, you know, we met again, and I'm probably going to beat this too much, but, you know, we met these people in custody, right? Mm-hmm. These people were in jail because they have a bench warrant out for navigating a situation like that, Cindy. And I think, you know, that kind of brings us to the next question, right? Is that of the 4 stories you heard, right? So the first story was about somebody who was having some maybe med compliance issues and is overslept. The second person doesn't have a driver's license, not enough transportation, had a bad experience with court, lived over the state. The third person had some scheduling, some address issues. Their wife had recently been diagnosed with cancer, and so they were navigating that. And then the fourth person in our story has 2 newborn babies at home and was navigating kind of that space. And I'm not a parent, and so maybe our parents can talk to this, but I think 1 baby seems very hard, so 2 babies seems extra hard. But I think that's exactly right, Cindy, is that there's court culture and court rules that we are setting and that we are also participating in by not challenging, right? And when we're not challenging those rules, we're creating implications on people's lives. And I think that's such a powerful takeaway. And so with that, then, you know, when I remind you that these folks are in custody for navigating not 1, but 2, I think Holly said, you know, 4 different co-occurring issues that are going on that we all may have navigated in our lives. How do we feel about the fact that these are the reasons, or these are the barriers that are responsible for sending people back to custody, right? They didn't commit new crimes, but they're for bench warrants. Is there anything that's coming up for folks related to these barriers being reasons why they've gone back to custody?
Shannon, I want to throw this in there, and I think it's a little bit related. With some of the things I've heard people say, I think it's perpetuating the stereotype that people are not appearing in court intentionally. And I think it's just some of the words that are being used by people that I've heard so far in this discussion, like excuses, or didn't plan ahead, or lack of motivation. You know, all of these people were my clients, right? And, I'm just going to throw that out there. And when I see, and I'm very aware of these barriers, and when I see people actually that they actually have the ability to voice what these barriers are, none of it comes across to me as intentional, like, right, screw the court, I'm not going to go. But the perception by many people in the court system is that that's how the defendants feel, right? That they're doing this intentionally to screw the court or whatever. And that's just not true. So I think I see this as we have to change the mindset. Number one, if this is pre-adjudication or pre-conviction, these people are presumed innocent, right? Yet we're treating them that they're not. We're incarcerating them for failure to have transportation, right? And in this county, it is horrible. Public transportation is horrible. It's non-existent in over half of our county. So I don't, I don't know. I guess I don't know how else to express myself, but I think it's just a mindset that many of us in the court system have to get away from, is that people aren't necessarily not appearing in court intentionally just to piss people off. And we have to do more to say, what can we do to help you come to court? Like that last woman said, why weren't any of the parties asked what court date was convenient for them, right? Is the morning better than the afternoon? Is there a day of the week that's better than another day of the week? We all try and accommodate the lawyers, and we certainly all have to accommodate the judge's schedule. But what about the people that matter the most? Why aren't we trying to accommodate them?
Totally. And Joy, I so appreciate your commentary. We are definitely going to unpack in our next section this conversation of willingness and willfulness to not come to court. I think your point is well heard, right? No, when we asked these folks, what was going on for you? Why didn't you get to court? No one said to us, I totally got to court and this is all a sham, right? Like no one said that. Everyone said, here's my story of why I didn't get to court. And even throughout some of these stories, you'll hear people own it, right? Like the first story that says, I didn't take my meds, I slept through 3 days, I went to work, I should have called and I didn't, right? Like that person owned it. I think it's more complicated. And I think some of that, Joy, you're absolutely right, is this perhaps perception that, people wake up one day and say, screw the court system, I'm not showing up. I don't know that that's necessarily how it works out. And I'm not sure that that's what these people are telling us, even if I want to believe that that's true, right? These stories are not suggesting that. I want to turn our attention to kind of Sarah's comment, which I think is really important, that often the FTA centers around this simple binary fact of appearance or not, right? So did you show up? Did you not? And sometimes the did you not part, the absence part, feels more intentional than it is. And I think that's important, rather than the why didn't you show up, she says. When individuals return from warrant status after an FTA, we often see probation staff writing reports articulating compliance, like failure to appear, right? But rarely are they going to see the person in custody to find out why. And I think that's really thoughtful that we've continued to remind the court that these people have failed to appear, but we haven't also contextualized to the court why they were not able to appear. So Sarah, thank you so much for adding that. I think that's a really thoughtful contribution. And I know that Rosalind's also a comment, to expand, maybe it's not just court culture, right? But that this is also a power dynamic. And that is absolutely important to note and to call out, right? So in the example that Cindy gave us, right, that, we're sitting around making logistical sense for the judge and the lawyers, but certainly not challenging, is it going to help any of the families? And that's certainly power in play. And that's an important aspect of, if we're going to think very critically about how we do this work and help people, we have to see where the power is, who holds the power, and how comfortable are we with challenging that, right? I think that's a comfortability that we have to kind of navigate with ourselves and with our work group team, is how willing are we to step up and challenge some of these pre-institutionalized or institutionalized norms that exist in our court. Christina, did you want to add something as well?
I was going to, but there's just an additional comment that bubbled up in chat through a couple different pathways from Lana.
Perfect. Yes. So are there any barriers being addressed by using electronic video court and appearance? We'll get there. So we do know, so Lake County, and maybe Joy can speak to this a little bit too. In Lake County, there is Zoom court as well as in-person court. There are some challenges with Zoom court that people are going to talk to us a little bit about in these stories. One of the questions, and we're not going to talk about this necessarily here in this moment, but we will in the later part of this learning cycle. One of the questions that we asked people that were in custody were, would you prefer preferred Zoom court or in-person court and why? And some of these conversations are really interesting and thoughtful about why people might prefer one over the other. And the other questions we also asked were things like, do you have access to reliable internet, a reliable computer? Do you have access to a reliable private or safe space if you didn't necessarily want to have that in a community setting like a library? And so we'll talk a little bit about how people are also navigating virtual court as well. But is there any other, things that are coming up based upon the 4 stories that we've heard so far? Okay, hearing none, we're gonna take a, I think it's a 6-minute break now. We will return in 6 minutes. So if you are in Eastern time, that's 4 p.m. No, that's 4 p.m. if you're on Eastern time. Yep. If you're in Central time, that is 3 p.m. If you are in Mountain Daylight Time, that's 2 p.m. And if you're in Pacific and or Mountain Standard Time, you Arizonans, that will be 1 p.m. So we'll see you all here shortly. All right, team, welcome back if you're here. We'll go ahead and get started here in a second. It is officially 4 p.m., 3 p.m., 2 p.m., 1 p.m. Perfect. All right, so we are going to do it again, but this time we're going to do it with 3 new stories. Again, we are talking about real people, and these are real experiences that they're having. Again, when we met these 3 people, we met them again in custody following their bench warrant. When we, in your breakout rooms, you'll talk about the 3 stories. I'll read them aloud. You'll kind of do the same process again. You'll identify the barriers that are going on for people, but then you're going to discuss the types of choices individuals are making. And I think this is the part where we're going to start to talk about, what does accountability look like in the court system? How do we challenge our current notions of accountability? How do we challenge the concept that Joy brought up earlier? I think Sarah and Cindy brought up earlier about intentionality of coming to court. How do we challenge our ideas about the types of choices or willfulness or motivation people have for coming to court? What do those things look like? So really in your groups now, in the next kind of 10 minutes, we're going to spend talking a bit about the barriers. So again, identifying those barriers, but mostly thinking about, what does it mean really for these folks? What kind of choices are they making in navigating these barriers about getting to court as scheduled? So with that, you'll go ahead and Christina will put up the small group or the breakout room pop-up, and then you should be able to self-select yourself into the group you're already in. Does that sound about right, Christina?
You're just assigned to the same group. So all you have to do is click the move or whatever the button is, and you're all set.
Perfect. All right, guys, welcome back. Welcome back. All right, so we've now gone through 3 more stories. Those stories told us stories about somebody navigating choices about housing, about we also see choices about being late to court. In my group, we didn't get to number 7, but story number 7 is about somebody whose wife had just gone through eye surgery, and their son also has autism. So they are the primary caregiver and the breadwinner of their family. So they were navigating kind of those spaces as well. And across all 3 of these 3 stories are people who made effectively a decision not to go to court. And so this is kind of where we're starting to think about, what are the complexities around not getting to court as scheduled, really challenging concepts of intentionality, willfulness, motivation, and accountability. So thinking about these stories, what is coming up for all of you about what these individuals were navigating? So, what kind of contextual factors were they having to consider when they were navigating if they should go to court or not? You can feel free to add into the chat or to take yourself off of mute.
Well, they're making a lot of choices. They're weighing the odds. They know there's consequences to criminal consequences or consequences to their personal life, and then making a choice, which is very unfortunate that this system isn't not flexible enough to take into consideration the individual experience. It's more of like, here's the box and I'm checking these boxes and this is what's going to happen. So it's just so real. It's sad.
Yeah, I think this actually speaks to Sarah from Santa Cruz's comment in our last debrief, right? Is that this is really starting to challenge the concept of binary, did you appear at court or not, right? That we think of these things as binary, but perhaps maybe it's more gray or complex. When we were thinking about there's been movement, I think, recently to think about how we contextualize not getting to court, and really trying to separate this kind of willfulness, or I've heard recently, even in statute, sometimes there's a difference between willful non-appearance and non-willful appearance. In all of these cases, we're suggesting that they made a choice, that they chose not to come to court. In this case, in these three cases, do we think that the term willfulness actually reflects this lived experience, or does it not? How do we feel about kind of this term of willfulness, or what does that mean in context of some of these stories?
Well, willful to me implies I am actively going out choosing not to do this, even though I could. And I think what these people are saying, I have given the situations in my life, I'm weighing what would be the results if I go to court versus if I don't go to court. And the scale weighs in favor of me not going to court because the consequences for me right now, if I go to court, are much greater.
Holly, yeah, I think you bring up a good point that we talked about in our group, is there are certainly long-term legal consequences, right, of not coming to court, but these folks are talking about their short-term consequences. And as Jenny points out in the chat, really thinking about their short-term consequences to their basic needs, right? And so for many of us, I think we have cars, we have support systems, we have reliable income, we have ways in which the short-term consequences to us we can kind of work through because we're avoiding long-term consequences because we have the ability to do that. These folks have lots of structural disadvantages that are happening at the same time that make potentially their ability to only think about short-term consequences, right? And so how do we also think about or account for people who don't necessarily have the space or resources to even consider long-term consequences because they're navigating their basic needs? So Holly, I think that's exactly right. I think thinking more thoughtfully about what do we even mean for willfulness, and is that the term we really want to be using in a court system, I think is important. And none of these, I mean, in one of the cases, the guy says, I think it's the guy says, I was going to be late, I didn't show up to court, right? But it was that's true. They just said, I'm not showing up, but in context to what it meant for them to not show up, right? And then thinking about like, are there rules that we're setting in the court space that are forcing people into these choices, right? Is there space to be more flexible? Can we be more flexible with these folks? So then thinking about this again, thinking about these are the types of choices that folks are making and the types of contexts that they're living in. Do we have any feelings again about, or any things that are coming up for folks about how these, because of these choices or this context, folks are going back to custody?
I guess I just want to say that like my vibe, like I'm getting emotionally, I'm having an emotional reaction to these, and I feel a really sense of disrespect towards the people and the real life problems that they are dealing with on a daily basis. And the inability to address those issues, it seems like a privilege problem. I mean, like you explained, we don't have to deal with that because we're in good situations where we can plan for the future. But I don't know, I can always think back of that moment in time in my life when maybe I couldn't, and then what would have happened. So I feel like just that empathy and that ability to understand that is a real barrier.
I have a question.
Please, yes, Trish.
I was wondering when you folks went in and talked to this group of folks and that had bench warrants, did you just choose people that were bench warrants on failure to appear for their very first, first appearance or arraignment, or was this like farther down the line? Because I'm reading that some people had attorneys, some didn't. At which stage of the hearings were these?
Yeah, Trish, that's an exceptionally great question. So it really was all over the place. We originally intended to collect information about where their FTAs were. We ended up having to pivot, but I think your point is well heard. And I think we'll kind of start to unpack a little bit of that down the line of, does it also matter where in the process this is happening? Right. We might be able to start to unpack when we're thinking about solutions to some of these barriers, or, right. Are some court appearances, do people need to be at them? Do they not need to be at them? And so that might help contextualize where these failures to appears are happening. Maybe it's early in the process or late. So to kind of long about, to answer your question, is that it's really along their entire court journey that these failure to appears could have happened.
So you didn't collect that information, or you couldn't?
We collected it on a handful of folks, but not on everyone.
Another question I had is, were these folks, did they just have like one case, or, did you find that many of them had multiple cases open that they were failing to appear on and picking up new cases, coming in with new charges and bench warrants?
So we didn't look at that extensively. That's on purpose. A lot of this, of course, was to just kind of understand the context people are kind of navigating. There were some kind of concerns about confidentiality of that and how we collected that information. Certainly things we have to think about when we're thinking about recommendations. But for the most part, people are coming in for their bench warrants, not necessarily for new crimes, and getting picked up as part of the bench warrant didn't come up because they were collecting new crimes, and that's where they're coming in. So by and large, these are mostly as bench warrants. But again, even if they were collecting a new crime, both that new crime and the one they're going through the court system, they're not charged for either of them, right? So there's still, the concept that these people are still navigating these barriers in a presumed innocent space. There is one person that we will talk about here in a minute who comes in for a failure to appear while he's on probation. So that person is actually sentenced, but that's some small context there. Holly, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I just want to, we've done, in Lake County, we did some interesting analysis on warrants that led to jail time, and there, two kinds of warrants. We had FTAs and also what are called first appearance warrants is for us. But so if these are FTAs, then that presumes that they have been out free, that somewhere in the process of their case, the judge said, you don't need, or at best, they paid some kind of bond. So they have been out free, and then suddenly they don't show up for court, and that's what puts them at jeopardy. Now, am I understanding all of these 50 correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
That's right. That's right. With that, we're going to do it one last time. So we're going to go to kind of a third breakout. We are going to discuss again 3 more real stories. This time, we're going to again think about the barriers that are coming up for people. But we're going to think about, are these barriers that people are navigating, are they fixed barriers? Like, this seems like it's a persistent concern for folks, or are these more situational barriers? So this is not a persistent concern for folks. So with that, we will spend another 10 minutes talking about these stories and kind of if these barriers are situational or fixed. And with that, Christina, can you help us move to breakouts? Welcome back to the big room. So we read 4 more stories. We've identified some different and other barriers perhaps. And we talked a little bit about if these kind of barriers were situational or fixed. It seems like some of the barriers we kind of identified in these folks are, just that that there were some transportation issues, being sick, no phone, no address, maybe being overwhelmed. The last story, somebody is, it seems very overwhelmed with navigating 2 co-occurring court experiences. We have the story about the person who wasn't able to get to court within 2 hours. So the conversation of, in our room, we talked a little bit about, did they speak up for themselves? Did they advocate for themselves that that wouldn't work? Is there space to do that? That might speak again to kind of court culture, kind of these power dynamics that are happening. Some other people have identified kind of mental health or lack of advocates. In our group, somebody brought up this concept again about fear or avoidance, right? That these emotions kind of get in the way for people, and the conversation was like that it creates this snowball feeling, right? That they get so emotionally exhausted and overwhelmed that it actually snowballs into all these other emotions that ultimately lead to these kind of very serious legal consequences. So thinking about kind of all of those barriers for people, we've identified that some are somewhat situational or somewhat fixed. And in some cases, right, we have somebody had pneumonia, right? That might be a situational barrier. But are there any ways in which you might think of a situational barrier or a barrier that comes up that is sometimes situational and maybe sometimes fixed, or vice versa?
Like housing, homelessness, people experience periods of homelessness and then some stable housing, but just sort of go back and forth.
Totally. I think that's a really great example, right? So for sometimes it's a persistent issue, for sometimes it's a situational issue. Another one that kind of comes up for me is thinking about transportation, right? So, my car was broke. Was broke down. And so, I didn't make it. That could be a situational issue, but perhaps it's also persistent because, maybe they don't have the money to fix it or the time to fix it. So in those ways, it might be kind of persistent. Thinking about kind of this concept that some of these barriers are sometimes situational and sometimes these barriers are fixed. Had we ever had conversations, or have we been thinking in the past, or how have you been thinking in the past about the consistency of barriers? So does any of the pretrial services or any of the community supports that you all use, do they consider consistency of barriers when thinking about how to help folks?
Well, just I'll speak up a little bit, but not in our jurisdiction, but it's something I'm really interested in is the idea of mobile mobile units, probation, pretrial units to actually then go to these homeless camps, which are growing. And then it's something that's starting out. We're in California. Several jurisdictions have done that, even mobile court specifically to go to homeless camps.
Totally, that's awesome. You know, one of the things that was brought up in my group that I think is really, you know, an important part is, you know, someone asked, you know, like, you know, I don't know, I only get a small blurb, like I need more context, like why did these, you know, what did these folks do? Why did they come in? And I think one of the things that I believe it was Rosalind from Missoula might have said was, you know, do those things matter, right? Like those things are the kind of the extra legal things. These are still barriers that are operating in the context for folks. You know, we made a very intentional choice to not provide information about demographic or race or underlying offense. Those things were intentional because we wanted you to feel the context and the barriers, and not have this kind of intersection of how you feel about people, about gender or races or preconceived notions about charges to influence the way we see barriers, right? All of these folks they were in custody, but it's important to know that all of them were represented by, you know, the public defender's office, right? They were not unrepresented at any point in time. And it's important because it means that they had representation throughout their court experience. They had somebody advocating for them in their court experience, and they still were navigating these barriers that brought them back to court. And so it makes us, you know, ask, you know, we've been thinking about, or we've been talking a little bit, at least in our group, and I see kind of on the Google sheet we're all sharing here, that there's a lot of people are identifying emotional exhaustion. They're identifying all of these feelings of lack of support or fear, or negative experiences from being overwhelmed or crying about their experience with their judge. You know, these, you know, we might think about, you don't have transportation as a quote unquote legitimate issue, right? That prevents you from getting to court. But these people are telling us that they also have a lot of emotional concerns that are also preventing them from getting to court. They're telling us that these emotional barriers are equally in the way for them. And so it makes us wonder, you know, and ask, do we think that people actually feel safe to tell the court that they need help to get through their case, even when they have advocates, even when they have representation? You know, in reflection of these things, thinking about, you know, in your experiences, do you have, I know, and I don't want to put our group on the spot. Someone shared in our story that a lot of times they do hear that people feel very overwhelmed and they are able to share their feelings, but are talking about emotional concerns about navigating the court part of the process for you all? Or do we, you know, specifically kind of focus on more of these concrete barriers that we can kind of identify? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Yeah, Rosalind asked, you know, she appreciates the question about whether a person feels safe sharing their challenges. You know, I think one of the things that I hear a lot in doing this work is this concept of people, you know, being really accountable to themselves. And we'll talk about this here in a second, really being accountable to themselves in getting to court. But it also makes me think that, have we equally considered emotional challenges the way that we consider transportation challenges or housing challenges or communication challenges? You know, I just wonder if that's something that any of our services, of the folks that are here, have they ever considered kind of these emotional challenges before?
And Shannon, in our mental health court, that's definitely taken into consideration.
For sure.
So, you know, when we set up the time for mental health court, it was in the mornings because the professionals told us people who are mentally ill tend to do better in the morning. We are much more forgiving if someone misses court, and it's all of a sudden there's a concern as opposed to, I can't believe they missed court, we're going to issue a bench warrant, right? It's, hey, probation officer or case manager, can you make contact with this person? Let's see what's going on. We've arranged transportation for people and everything else. But if you're not in that specialty court, you're not getting any of that.
Yeah, you know, Joy, I think that I think you bring up something that even I think Holly might have been kind of talking about earlier, right? Is that maybe we give a lot of grace and empathy to folks with severe mental health diagnosis, and that makes sense. But because we don't necessarily have a diagnosis, does that mean that we don't need to, that there's no extension of mercy or grace or empathy, right? That people are navigating lots of concerns that are emotionally exhausting and challenging without a mental health diagnosis, right? So is our grace then and empathy then conditional on a diagnosis, right? I think that's a question we certainly need to be asking the courts for sure.
I mean, listen, we had a situation in the last year where a woman gave birth, was in the hospital. That's why she missed court. She was breastfeeding her child and she was still remanded for missing court while she was breastfeeding. That to me was just a complete power trip by the court, right? There was no empathy there. That was unconscionable.
I mean, I
and I don't expect a response, because how can anybody possibly respond to that? Like, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's, I think that's in part why we're here today, right? Is that, people are complex and they have complex needs, and people are experiencing structural barriers, and that there are a tension of policies, and we are simply just like setting a whole bunch of rules about things. And we're not necessarily like, we're doing all of this to process people, but are we really thinking about people, in the space, right? The reason why we've kind of tried to bring to you these real stories of these real people is so that we're not talking about the concept of not coming to court as in abstract or in theory, right? That if we're going to move towards this space that is people first and person first, that we then have to talk about what that means by highlighting them as people. This is not, our goal here isn't to sensationalize their stories. The goal here is to share what people are really navigating. And, we've talked about these barriers. We've talked about these barriers as choices. Somebody in my group used coerced choice or forced choice, right? We've kind of challenged the idea of willfulness. And we've kind of challenged this idea that sometimes things are very persistent problems, and sometimes they're situational, and maybe it's the situationalness that is tripping people up because it's not something they navigate. And so thinking about all of kind of the stories that you've heard from 12 or so people of 50. Now, these stories are not all that unique from the other, remaining folks that we talked to. But does the concept, or does the term like failure to appear, really reliably capture what's happening for these folks?
Failure has a somewhat negative connotation as a word.
Yeah.
What if they actually, made actually every attempt to make it, right? And their car broke down, a block away. I mean, those things happen and they didn't make it, but that counts as a failure. So there's no no accounting for the attempts.
Yeah, Fernando, I think that's a really thoughtful contribution, that there's no gray there, right? That your attempts, the motivation, the all of the hurdles that you ran to get there, like we're not going to give you any credit for any of them. Your credit is, did you get here or not? And you might have, moved hell and high water to get to the block, just a block down the way, right? But we're not going to give you credit for that as part of this. I think, this speaks again to, Sarah's commentary earlier about the ways in which we approach this as a binary construct, and we measure it as binary. And then we use the language as binary when we all have spent 2 hours now understanding that it's not so binary. Sherelle, can you move to the next slide? And so, it brings us to kind of this remaining question that, we send people back to custody for these reasons, right? Like Joy's story that she shared. I think it was, Cindy's story that she was sharing earlier about the challenges that folks were having about, scheduling. These are reasons why we're sending people back to custody, all of which are not illegal. People are not necessarily doing illegal things and finding themselves back in custody. Joy told us a story about somebody breastfeeding, and that brought them back to custody, right? I think we will spend the next learning cycle unpacking what does that mean then for helping people get to court, and is it the court's responsibility to help people get to court, right? And that might, where you stand on that might matter a little bit. And so next time when we're all together, we're going to kind of discuss exactly that, the court's role in helping individuals get to court as schedule, thinking about to what extent is it the court's role, who in the court work group is responsible, if someone is responsible. We're going to talk about specific strategies that folks are using and to help people get to court on as scheduled, and then evaluating if those strategies are kind of aligned with all of the kind of barriers that we've identified. So I think Holly might have alluded to this punchline as her first contribution to the group, right? That it's maybe not enough that it's a voucher ticket or a Uber ride or a transportation or a court reminder, that there's more, we have more aligning to do with the strategies that were offered compared to the barriers that people are facing. And then we're going to spend some time next time talking about the evidence behind the strategies that courts are using. If between now and our next time, which I believe is July 13th when we see each other, if you and your group are doing something that you would like to talk about and highlight, please reach out to Christina and Sherelle. And we'll, we'd love to talk about the work that you're doing. I know that Bernalillo County out of New Mexico was talking a little bit about the work that they were doing, which sounds really interesting. So we'd love to highlight the work that you guys are already doing in your jurisdictions. Before I close out, I want to also thank so much to Joy and Anthony and the Lake County, Illinois group for really asking critical questions, right? They were interested in how their court could do better, and being interested in how their court could do better to help people get to court. They're talking to people and hearing real stories and having to rectify kind of how their court is in part responsible for some of these issues. And I think that takes a lot of vulnerability on a jurisdiction to be open and willing to face the challenges that they have, and talk about them openly in a large group, and to speak about what kind of impacts they can have. So I hope that we all feel inspired by Lake County's work and the questions that they're asking, that we are inspired to ask more thoughtful questions of the folks that we come in contact with, and that we're challenging kind of the court processes in ways in which that we can learn from Lake County and kind of the questions that they're asking to do this work moving forward. With that, thank you all so much for participating, for leaning into these stories, to thinking about these narratives. I want to turn it over to Sherelle for any last words she has.
No, Shannon, you did a great job. I just want to reiterate, we appreciate everyone being attentive and engaged for 2 hours. We really appreciate it. And our next workshop is July 13th. We have office hours set up for next week, June 15th. So if you just want to pop in, chat with each other, Christina and myself will be there. So that's it. And we hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. And if you need anything, feel free to email myself and Christina.
And one last thing, quick, there is a survey link for feedback in the chat box. If we're giving you these 4 minutes back, and so hopefully you can take those to give us a little bit of feedback so that we can use it moving forward on the rest of the series. So
Thanks, Jen. And we'll also go ahead and send that link out, but I will keep the room open for the next couple minutes just so folks can access the survey and chat if they'd like.
And Curtis, we want to see your baby, I think, on screen.
Oh, cute.
Thanks, folks. I'm going to officially stop recording now, but again, I will leave the room open.